There's people who grew up very similar in the same block who didn't go to jail.
What happens when a prison chaplain, a criminologist, and an ex-drug dealer walk into a bar? It's no joke.
I wanted cash, I wanted it at a young age, I wanted it quick.
All of us are capable of doing bad things.
What was good for me was actually evil for somebody else.
It's the start of a real conversation.
I never look at someone as being innately evil.
Goes back to the heart of, is evil a helpful concept?
It's the absence of goodness rather than the presence of something.
3 ways of seeing the world, 1 bar, and all the questions that connect us. Pull up a stall and see who's walking into my bar. Okay, so today we're talking about evil and why people do bad things and can they change. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hey, I'm Joshua. I'm a prison chaplain. I work in prisons helping men discover why they are where they are.
I'm Sam. I used to be a drug dealer and I'm now a husband and a soon-to-be dad, and I work in market research.
I'm Becca. I'm a criminologist. I've been researching prisons and the criminal justice system for about 7 years.
Okay, Becca, from a criminology perspective, why do people end up doing bad things?
All of us are capable of doing bad things, things that would be considered evil, immoral, harmful, etc. I think if we really want to understand where that kind of stuff comes from, we need to look at it from a collective and social perspective. So what are the sorts of circumstances and social situations which lead people into causing harm to others? We do live in a society where perhaps we might all understand killing someone, murder, to be the utmost evil act, right? And we see murders in the news, people in court, they go punished, but we also live in a society that might glorify somebody were they to kill in the army, for example. They might decorate them with medals.
So, Joshua, when you sit down with people that have committed crimes, do you see just a bad person overall?
From a theological, even philosophical perspective, my initial definition of evil is an absence rather than a presence.
Okay.
It's the absence of goodness rather than the presence of something. And so I'm not trying to evade the question, but I'd probably say neither.
Okay.
In my work, in the time I'm spending with these men, it's a case of acknowledging the absence of something that could have been there, that I would have loved to have been there, and the result being behaviour that has been kind of conditioned by the absence of, goodness in a way that my faith would want to amplify in the world. And so I never look at someone as being innately evil, but never necessarily beginning with just someone who's defined by evil they've done, but the story that perhaps has shaped them, usually being the lack of something.
You've been on the bad side of things. How did it come to that?
I think for myself, growing up, first thing I wanted to be was a footballer. And then when I realized that that wasn't going to work for me, the next alternatives I kind of saw around me was people doing criminal activity type stuff, whether that's selling drugs, doing fraud, things like that. And that captivated me. I wanted to make money. I grew up on a council estate. Really and truly, I thought that that was my way of becoming successful. And so I just did that. It was that simple.
Was it more like the lifestyle, what came with it? Did you see people around you? Because sometimes I speak to young men that have been caught up in that lifestyle, and they'll say that the lifestyle, the chains, the big cars, that's the only people that they saw outside of the footballers that were driving nice cars, had, the women around them. Was that all a part of it?
When I thought about who made money, that was my first view outside of footballers was like, oh, it's these people who are making money on the streets. So for me, I was drawn to that. I wanted cash. I wanted it at a young age. I wanted it quick.
Do you not think, though, that we've all maybe lacked something, but, we're not all out here doing bad things, quote unquote? So why is it that some people then end up doing bad things, but the rest of us don't?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many factors to that, but from my position as a follower of Jesus, the moral value that he places on the heart is far greater than anything else. The capacity that man has to do evil within the heart is across the board. And so my understanding of the men that I work with is you have actioned something that I have done within my heart internally. And from my belief, my kind of spiritual framework, that has resulted in the same thing.
Right.
And I'm dealing with the heart of a matter by trying to heal matters of the heart. So it always begins with what is the origin of this story and what was lacking? And I find that to be a more compelling approach.
So, Becca, what do stories like Sam tell you about human nature?
I think it's really crucial what Sam was saying in terms of like, we all live in a society where like we need money to survive, right? We're not able to like feed, clothe or put a roof over our head unless we have some kind of money. And the kind of glamorous lifestyle that you're talking about is also something that's glorified not only in like particular pockets of society, that's mainstream. That's on, you turn on the TV, you watch a show, everybody's going for that, right? So people for whom accessing that is more and more difficult are gonna look for different routes to do it.
Thinking about back to myself when I was 18 and what was good for me was actually evil for somebody else. But in my head, I genuinely felt like I need to make money and I don't care how that affects anybody else. But as I've matured over the years and I have a different perspective, I can actually see that, no, what I was doing was wrong.
This is for all of you. Do you feel like faith gives more of an understanding to what is good and evil more than society does?
I've met a lot of people, both like in my research work and also in my life, for whom faith has been like a very transformative, powerful force. But not to like toot the same horn over and over again, but I don't think that it is an unalloyed good as well, right? Because if we look at history, we even look at the present moment, you see the way in which institutions of faith have been used in like very concerning ways. That if we're going to talk about evil, if we're going to talk about violence, we can look at the history of the Catholic Church, when there's been child abuse scandals in institutions of faith, and like the role of Christianity, for example, in advancing British colonialism and other colonialism around the world. Faith was a handmaiden to that.
I think you're highlighting the distortion of the institutions. And Gandhi was famous for saying, I don't have a problem with Jesus. It's his followers I have the issue with. And a lot of Christians have poorly represented who Christ is time and time again. In my work, what I'm trying to do is distill the teachings of Jesus as a framework for becoming who you actually are and letting go of the debris and the masks that have kind of robbed you of enjoying who you actually are.
Right.
And that's the kind of moral pathway of being someone to become more like Christ. Has a sort of a moral architecture to it, which I haven't discovered anywhere else. So for that reason, I find it incredibly helpful because it's an image to point towards. It's an image of what true humanity looks like, which is sacrificial and generous and kind and loving to the degree that Christ revealed it. And that isn't imaged anywhere else.
So when you was on the roads and doing what you was doing, on the streets, did you come from a Christian background?
Yeah.
So then you still did bad?
Yeah, exactly. And that was because I didn't believe in that stuff.
Right, okay.
So for like, my mum knew what I was doing was bad. My dad thought what I was doing was bad. For me, what they thought was good or evil didn't matter to me.
Right.
For me, this was good. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of scripture is that it's almost like it's an anthology of human brokenness. Every story includes some level of someone getting it unthinkably wrong. But the scripture has its climax in the person of Jesus, who does the opposite. And so what we see in scripture is like, yeah, you can get it wrong, and you can break to the point of, shattering other people's lives and come to terms with that. And then in Christ, we find a new humanity, a new way of being. And scripture just doesn't hide away from our level of brokenness.
Your adherence to the kind of principles that was being offered by faith coincided with other, changes in your circumstance or a sense of relationship? Because I feel like a lot of the time when I'm hearing about transformative experiences that people have, it's not only them and a set of abstract principles, but also a set of relationships. They can feel integrated into a community, they can feel less alone. Suddenly the isolation and the avarice of I need to get money and this, who cares? Because I feel like when you're talking about its impact on other people, this is human empathy. And I'm wondering whether that aspect is being undersold here in terms of how people get transformed.
For me, I didn't start following Jesus in prison. That came when I came out of prison. So I still was on the same stuff that I was on, selling drugs and whatnot. And for me, I had a point in my life where I felt hopeless. I had all of the things that I thought was making me successful. I had, enough cash to feel good about myself, had all the things I wanted, but I felt empty. And I feel like my whole life up until that point, I wasn't opening the door.
Becca, do you feel that we use the word evil as a concept for behaviour that we just don't understand?
To call something evil means that we end up exceptionalising it as something totally far away from us and outside of ourselves in a way which then invites us not to look at, well, how are we actually involved in this or participating in this? And I think that when we talk about evil in that way, it serves a distancing function. It allows it to become this abstract, almost mystified thing that's completely away from us. And that actually serves to obfuscate and reduce our understanding rather than actually being a bit curious, opening it up, well, what's going on here? And so I think evil sometimes leads us away from asking that kind of real stuff.
I definitely agree with you. And I think that the challenge with, I don't know, sometimes seeing things from like a societal level perspective, it takes away from the line in every person's heart, which is, I do believe there is like good and evil. And actually a lot of it is a heart issue. Like I can talk about myself. It started off with like greed. It started off with envy. Anyone can say, oh yeah, you're just a product of your environment, but it's no, like I had a choice on what I chose to think about and what I chose to like accept into my mind and stuff, because there's people who grew up very similar in the same block who didn't go to jail.
I'd be interested in the social sciences. We keep talking about the heart, and we're speaking about evil with perhaps a more abstract origin to it. What is the origin story sociologically? Like, would it always come down to an analysis of environment? Sam was mentioning the heart. I don't know. I'd be interested almost with the terminology that you would bring to that kind of language.
You would want to look at the environment. You would want to look at, like, what are the social structures around? So let's say, like, person A murders person B, right? The context of that situation matters, because if person A is a soldier in a theatre of war and they murder person B, then, like, we as a society have very little to say about it. But if that is somebody in an intimate relationship, now we're calling it domestic violence or domestic homicide, right? If it's somebody and their friend, like, already we know that we can't abstract those sorts of events away from the context. So we're looking at, like, firstly at context.
Theologically, entering the world with a soul brings a sense of complexity to it, because the soul within itself can move in one of two directions. And we would believe that from day one, the soul is at war. You know, there's a tug between, for the sake of the conversation, good and evil. Sociologically, how far back do you go in terms of the disposition of a human? Like,
so if you really want to go back...
Let's go back, babe.
I'm interested in the very idea of a soul, right? Because in human history, that was not always a given. The idea of personhood, of an individual who has a particular internal terrain over which there can be such a battle, is something that emerges at a particular point in history. So if you really want to go back, then even the notion of a soul is something that social theorists, social scientists will say, well, this isn't an innate thing. This is born at a particular time. And when is that? And same for all kinds of institutions, right?
For sure.
Prisons have not existed in the whole of human society across history. Neither have police. It emerges at particular historical moments. So you want to look at the threads that produce even the very concept of an individual soul.
yes.
Do we think prison actually helps people? Or is it just there to punish them?
It's there to punish people. If somebody was like thoughtfully designing something to improve people's lives, you wouldn't end up with what you have in prison. And I say that because, talking from my experience, it's like you come into prison, you're around other people who've obviously gone to prison for doing something wrong. So actually, let's just say not everybody in there wants to change their life. So when you think about it, like, just from a logical perspective, like, you're actually rubbing shoulders with people who are like doing crime and more likely to do crime. And then what's the odds for you? Like, do you know what I mean? So I don't really feel like whilst I was in there, the environment was designed to help me change.
I guess both of you could answer. Do you ever feel that tug of wanting to change, but then, you know, someone else is maybe whispering something or saying something that makes you want to go back or revisit that lifestyle? Do you see it when they come into your space? Do you see the internal battle a lot?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I feel it in myself, just in terms of the way you articulate it, of like that question within your soul of like, do I do the right thing here? A lot of the guys, they come into the chapel, and that is just this brief moment of peace and calm from the chaos of the wings. And often in that space, that's where the conversation comes out, because they can finally think about what's actually going on within them. So it's less a place where it's like everyone's saying how good they want to be. It's more of a sense of, oh, now I have an image to compare the other image against. You know, this image of Christ that I've been talking about.
Right.
And then that conversation really begins of, then the battle is named, then we can start doing the work.
Do we think if forgiveness wasn't a thing within faith, that people would still do badness? So if they knew there was no forgiveness, that's it, it's over for you, buddy.
I haven't met that many people who did what they did assuming they would be forgiven.
Well, I do think sometimes within Christianity, within the faith, that people do bad things because they know that there's the forgiveness part.
Or like an abuse of grace.
Yeah, of the grace. I think there's that notion of, as long as I ask for forgiveness, then everything will be okay. Do you think if that wasn't there, then people still would do bad things?
In 7 years of doing the work, I've never met someone who says, I can be flippant about my actions because ultimately there's grace. The common thread of what I've experienced is I cannot forgive myself, and I cannot even comprehend that I could receive grace for what I've done. The work that I feel like we're doing is chipping away against, you know, if guilt is I've done something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong, it's really working against that tidal wave of shame day in, day out to get to the point of, no, there is forgiveness for you, not necessarily from your victim, but from God, from Christ. That's the battle.
I find that it's more harder to like forgive yourself or let go of an identity and try to become a new person. If you have been in prison, like just being labelled, maybe even stigmatised, or even just the lure of whatever you was involved with before being like so strong. Sometimes going to prison makes you way more honest with yourself.
You've researched the prison system, and what would you say actually makes somebody change?
With the caveat that it's different for every person, I do think the thing that makes the biggest difference is it is circumstances. It is like giving people a level of like support and infrastructure that they didn't have going into that situation when they're coming out. And this is where the reoffending rates for people who are doing short sentences are persistently high. And this is over decades, right? This is not like, oh, something happened and so we can just tweak it. It's like the prison system doesn't function. So for me, real transformation on an individual scale as well as on a collective scale. Like there are individuals who've managed to transform their lives, but a lot of that has not been with that set of resources. It's not been with systemic change and support that can actually get people to be living a different kind of life.
Do you think there's something in particular that when they're in that space helps them take responsibility?
I think there's different things for different people. People in prison are not like a special alien species that are different from people outside. When we've done bad things, even if they haven't been criminalised activities in our own life, what has helped us take ownership, reflect on those circumstances, have conversations with people we've hurt, for example. All of those things I think are necessarily human, but that shame element I've actually seen do more harm than good in terms of if there were no forgiveness, people who think, well, I'm a lost cause, I'm just a piece of dirt, actually can discourage people from feeling like, well, I can't live a different life because this is who I am, like at my core. And that to me doesn't help.
A lot of people don't really invest into people who've got like, double-digit sentences and stuff. And one of the big things, a lack of hope. But that sense of like, it doesn't matter what I do, I can't change. That's one of the biggest things that I think is missing, like hope,
I'd be interested to know, Sam, what helped you take responsibility?
Like at the core of it, it does come down to following Jesus for me, because ultimately, like to accept forgiveness, I need to accept I've done something wrong. And again, not just abstract following Jesus, but that happens in community. So I've got like good brothers that, that I walk this journey with. And it's like actually learning to get advice, wisdom from other people because clearly I hadn't been making good decisions. So I needed to learn how to make better decisions. And for me, ultimately, I think that that's like what manhood is about, taking responsibility for your decisions. Like, at the end of the day, whatever I choose to do, whether it's good or bad, I need to own that.
Right.
And I'm going to pay the consequences for it, but I'm also going to get the rewards for the good. So if I take the good rewards for my behaviour, I also need to own the consequences for my bad behaviour.
Is there any crime that is unforgivable?
There's many that I can't forgive. There's many that I would struggle to forgive. But in deeper awareness of what Christ has done for me and his forgiveness of me, I feel more compelled and empowered to forgive others.
Personally, I'm like, I find that hard to stomach. I need to go home. Like, I need to process. Like, it's very difficult. But
Right.
I do think, again, like, the prison system punishes certain types of people, right? I also find some of the most powerful people in the world being 2 seconds away from a button that can nuke an entire city to be intolerable, unforgivable, like, you know, continue to live peaceful, happy lives where they're entirely untouched by their crimes. So I also, the kind of focus on, like, day-to-day crime that happens, like, within our communities is something which I always try and balance out with, like, well, what are we seeing going unremarked on, let alone unpunished?
What do you think makes somebody want to actually change their life?
The importance of hope is crucial. People can change for all sorts of different reasons. Some people, faith is transformative. For some people, having children is transformative. For some people, having a job is transformative. Like, understanding that there is hope in some way in their life is it's that little bit of light that people can see at the end of the tunnel, which then is the kind of motivation that, okay, I can move forward in this kind of a way.
My thing is, what does genuine, like, transformation look like? Because someone can say, I've changed, this is the way I want to walk now, but how do you know when it's real or when they're just saying it just, you know, to look good or feel good for themselves?
For me, transformation, a big part of it is when you're less selfish. So you think about others, you have the ability to put other people's needs before yourself, maybe your family, people outside of your family, society.
It's difficult to know what, with anybody, right, how genuine they're being, what's really happened in that inner soul. And I agree with Sam that it's like, proof is in the pudding in terms of their actions. So if someone tells me, like, oh, I'm sorry I was rude to you, and then the next time I see them, they're rude to me again, it's like, okay, well, you weren't that sorry, right? Yeah. That's kind of, I feel like that part of it is kind of common sense. Looking at it from a collective scale, if we're going to look at, like, the worst unforgivable crimes imaginable, how do they happen, right? And I think that goes back to the heart of, like, is evil a helpful concept? Because when we've put it in a box, called it evil and exceptionalized it and pushed it away from us, it means that we're less likely to go, oh, okay, well, if we care about child abuse, for example, we know actually the majority of child abuse happens in the family. So what's going on in the families? What's going on in homes? How do we, like, and this is what happens, right? How do we train other people who are in contact with children to recognise, have those safeguarding protocols, all of that kind of thing? When you take a less emotionally charged look at the problem, I feel like that can help do transformation on a grander scale.
Have you guys ever met people that have no remorse? They're just like, I did what I did, I am who I am. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Walk on the other side of the street.
But you're supposed to help them, no?
No, not necessarily. As you said, I agree. If somebody doesn't want, what's my business? There are people who don't want to change, and it's not my job I'm not going to chase you down to change you.
What about in both of your positions? When you see these young men, what if someone comes in and they just have no remorse? They don't care. They've done the unthinkable and there's nothing there.
I've met men that just have a really good justification for what they've done by their own standards and therefore don't feel remorse. I'm like, bro, it is undeniable the damage that you've caused, and your best argument feels like an escape around the reality of it. I have to surrender it, though, because it's very rare that I feel like I convince someone of what they've done being something to be remorseful of. Again, I was talking about the imaging of something. When you have the image of Christ, it's a stark image of what you thought being a man was. And suddenly, over time, that image starts carrying more weight than your image. And suddenly, what felt like a really noble thing to have done no longer does. I struggle with it, though, because I've heard people, they've done something incredibly violent, and there is no self-defense in their case. But under their understanding, somehow it's like, well, I had a right to do this. And yeah, I've never come up with a compelling argument to convince them in a moment. It's more just been a long imaging of something better.
Must be hard, though. for yourself, because you're
It's
human. You're a
frustrating,
human
yeah.
being, and then to hear certain things, it must.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think talking about love, talking about transformation, like love is also being honest with people. And it's like, bro, I had to change my life. No one was chasing me to help me change. It's like I had to make a decision. I want to change. I don't want to be this guy I was before. And I think that, again, back to like manhood and stuff like that, that is like taking personal responsibility. Like you're accountable for your actions. And a lot of guys do want to make excuses, but excuses can only get you so far.
Over the last like 30, 40 years of like increasing amounts of psychology, behaviour work in prison, it now becomes part of, for some people, they have to demonstrate remorse to be let out, right?
Right.
But that becomes quite a like murky waters because because it's a tick box exercise. When I started to talk to them, they had ready like the story that you have to tell, because they're like, oh, okay, well, if you're a psychologist that has a bearing on my sentence, I have a story for you, right?
Right.
And that includes a particular performance of remorse. But I've also met people for whom like they were being real about it, but then they were kind of punished or seen suspiciously for that level of honesty because the tick box exercise is like, doesn't show remorse.
Yeah, right.
So I've definitely met people who didn't have any, but I've also met people for whom they had to perform a fake version of it because they knew that that was the pathway that was going to help them through.
So what do you feel like would be a better way of maybe measuring transformation and stuff? And I think like that's probably why I'm like back to the prison can't really help people, because it's not designed to.
No, I agree with you. I don't think that prisons are, if their purpose is to transform people, they're not doing it. So I don't think that measuring and kind of quantifying remorse is particularly going to help us. I think that the whole system needs looking at and overhauling, and a whole different system of like how to deal with behaviour that we do and don't want in our society needs to be created, because I don't think prisons do that.
Well, guys, we've come to the end of our chat. It's been a brilliant conversation over good, the evil. Is there such thing? Do we need transformation or do we need punishment? I've enjoyed it all. I've loved the deep dive. So, yeah, thank you for coming to my bar.
Thanks for having me.
So join me next time to see who walks into my bar.